The airlock pressure gauge hit 0 before my heart did. I had exactly 4 seconds between the seal confirmation light and the moment the outer door opened. 4 seconds to decide whether the expression on my face would be neutral, warm, or something in between. I chose neutral. Neutral was the only honest option when you were about to meet the being who had come to your home to tell you how much of it you were allowed to keep. His name was Sotharak, and he came through the airlock the way powerful things always do. Slowly, deliberately, as if the concept of rushing had never occurred to his species. He was tall by any standard, nearly 2.5 meters, with a torso that tapered into 4 articulated lower limbs. His outer shell was a dark greenish gray, and the compound eyes on either side of his head caught the light in the corridor and scattered it into a dozen tiny reflections. He wore a formal sash across his upper body, deep violet with gold thread, and it told me everything I needed to know about how he saw this meeting. He had dressed for a signing ceremony, not a negotiation. My name is Lena Vasquez. I am the senior diplomatic liaison assigned to the human vessel Endurance, and I had been waiting for this moment for 6 years. Not this exact moment. I had not specifically planned for the airlock scene with the lighting and the 4 seconds, but this moment in the larger sense. The moment when the Velhari finally agreed to talk face-to-face, instead of through broadcast transmissions and third-party intermediaries. The moment when one of them actually came aboard one of ours. I extended my hand. The gesture meant nothing to him culturally, but he had been briefed, and he placed the flat of one of his upper limbs briefly against my palm, in a motion that his team had clearly practiced. It was courteous. It was also slightly off, the way a person looks when they are performing a greeting they learned from a recording, rather than lived experience. I appreciated the effort. I did not say so. Ambassador Sotharak, I said. Welcome aboard the Endurance. I am Captain Lena Vasquez. I will be your primary contact for the duration of your visit. His translator unit, a small device embedded just behind his left eye, processed my words in about half a second. When he responded, the sound that came out of the speaker on his chest was a flat, synthesized version of something his species produced, with a set of throat structures that humans do not have. The translation came through my own earpiece a beat later. Captain Vasquez, I trust the journey was not too demanding for your crew. It was a standard opening. I had heard variations of it in the recordings my team had studied. It was the Velhari equivalent of commenting on the weather, polite, empty, designed to fill the space between arrival and business. What was interesting was the word demanding, not comfortable, not pleasant, demanding. His species used that word when they were speaking to someone they considered to be struggling. It was not an insult. It was simply the lens through which they saw us. Not at all, I said. Please come through. I led him and his 2 attendants, both smaller versions of himself, their sashes plain white without rank markings, down the main corridor toward the conference suite. I had arranged the route carefully, not the shortest path, but the most informative one. We passed the engineering bay first, where a team of 6 technicians was running calibration tests on the secondary drive array. None of them looked up. They were absorbed in their work, arguing cheerfully about a torque variance reading, and the argument had that comfortable, automatic quality that comes from people who have had the same argument many times and enjoy it. Sotharak paused for exactly 2 seconds. I kept walking and let him catch up. We passed the medical bay, where Dr. Owen Garrett was reviewing patient files at his standing desk with a cup of coffee in his hand. Owen had been the ship's chief physician for 11 years. He had the particular calm of someone who had seen enough emergencies that nothing surprised him anymore. He glanced up as we passed, gave me a small nod, and looked back at his files. No visible reaction to the alien diplomat moving through his corridor, just a nod. The ambassador said nothing, but I noticed his attendants exchanging a very brief look that I had been trained to recognize, the Velhari equivalent of a raised eyebrow. We reached the conference suite, and I gestured him inside. The room was simple. A long table, chairs on both sides, a viewport along the far wall showing open space. I had chosen not to decorate it with flags or banners, or any of the usual diplomatic trappings, just the room, the chairs, and the stars outside. Sotharak moved to the viewport before he moved to the table. He stood there for a moment looking out. I let him. The view from this point in the system was beautiful in a technical sense. Several of the outer planets were visible as bright points against the black, and the distant light of the sun gave everything a clean, cold edge. There was nothing else out there. Not from this angle, not at this distance. Just empty space. A quiet system, he said. We find it peaceful, I said. He turned from the viewport and took his seat. His two attendants arranged themselves behind him. I sat across from him. My own aide, a young man named Corin Adler, who had the useful quality of being exceptionally smart, while also looking like he was not paying particular attention, sat at my right. Corin was paying very close attention. He always was. The ambassador opened the case he had carried in personally, which told me the contents were important enough that he did not trust it to his staff, and placed a document on the table between us. It was a physical document, which was itself a statement. The Velhari used physical documents only for things they considered final. This is the Framework Memorandum, Sothorak said. It outlines the adjusted arrangements the Interstellar Council has approved for the human territories, trade corridor designations, resource extraction protocols, and the expanded advisory presence we will be establishing in 3 of your outer systems. I looked at the document. I did not touch it. Advisory presence, I said. Our personnel, he clarified, will assist your local administrations in aligning their operations with Council standards. It is a common arrangement for developing civilizations. There is nothing punitive in the intention. Developing civilizations. He said it the way you might refer to a child who is learning to read. Not meanly, but with the complete and comfortable certainty that the gap between his experience and yours was simply the natural order of things. His species had been in space for 900 years. They had built an empire across 40 systems. From where he sat, we were an interesting new arrival who had wandered into a neighborhood with established rules and needed to be oriented. I picked up the document. I read the first page. Then I set it down gently and looked at him. Thank you for bringing this in person, Ambassador, I said. Before we discuss the specifics, I wonder if you might be interested in a brief tour of our operational area. We have some things I think you would find worth seeing. He studied me for a moment. His compound eyes did not move the way human eyes do. They simply were, gathering everything at once. But the slight tilt of his head was a Velhari expression I recognized from the briefing materials. He was curious. He was also slightly amused. A tour, he repeated. We find that context is useful, I said, for both sides. He considered this for 3 seconds. I counted. Very well, he said. I smiled at him. It was a real smile, which I allowed myself, because I had earned it. Excellent, I said. We'll depart at first watch. In the meantime, your quarters are prepared, and my team will see to anything you need. I stood, and Corin stood a half-second later. The ambassador rose as well, and as he did, he glanced once more at the viewport. Space, quiet and empty and patient, looked back. I left the document exactly where I had set it. I did not take it with me. I did not need to. In 20 hours, the conversation would be different, and the document would be irrelevant, and Sothorak would understand things about the human species that 900 years of Velhari history had not prepared him for. I walked back to my quarters, poured a glass of water, and stood at my own viewport for a long moment. Somewhere out past the heliopause, in the dark that scanners could not reach from this distance, 312 ships waited in perfect silence. They had been waiting for a long time. They were very good at it. So was I. The Endurance departed at 0600, and I was on the bridge when we cleared the inner system. Sothorak arrived 11 minutes after I did, which told me he had not slept well. His 2 attendants flanked him as always, but one of them, the slightly taller one I had started thinking of as second, since neither of them had been formally introduced, was carrying what looked like a portable scanner unit tucked under one limb. They had brought their own instruments. I had expected this. Good morning, Ambassador, I said. Please, there is a station prepared for you here. I had arranged a secondary observation console along the starboard side of the bridge. It had full access to navigation data, system maps, and non-classified sensor feeds. Everything a diplomat would need to feel informed. Everything carefully selected. Sothorak settled at the console and said very little, as the Endurance moved out through the middle system. I ran the ship normally. The crew performed their duties and spoke to each other the way people who have worked together for years speak. Quickly, precisely, without ceremony. Lieutenant Priya Nolan, at navigation, and Engineer Dale Hutchins at drive control, had a running exchange about fuel efficiency calculations that I knew from experience would take most of the morning. They were not performing for the ambassador. They simply did not find his presence remarkable enough to change their behavior, and that, I knew, was itself remarkable to him. We crossed the orbit of the fourth planet 2 hours in. The planet was a cold, rocky body, largely unremarkable, and as we moved past it, the comm system crackled with a brief exchange between the Endurance and a monitoring station on the surface. 2 researchers were requesting a supply adjustment for the following quarter. The conversation took 40 seconds. One of our bridge officers confirmed the request and logged it without asking me. Standard procedure. Sotharak turned from his console. "You maintain a presence on that planet?" "Research station," I said. "Geological survey team. They have been there for about 7 years." "In such conditions?" "They find it interesting," I said. He turned back to his console. A few minutes later I saw Second lean toward him and say something in quiet Velhari. I did not catch it. My earpiece was not sensitive enough for low-register Velhari at that distance. But I caught the ambassador's response, 3 words, and my earpiece gave me, "Not yet clear." We reached the heliopause 4 hours later. This is the edge where a star's influence fades and the true interstellar medium begins. Most species treat it as a threshold, the point where you have officially left a system and entered the wider galaxy. Humans use it as a parking zone. At least, we have been known to. As the Endurance crossed that boundary, something happened on the ambassador's console that made him go very still. His scanner unit, the one Second had brought, began registering anomalies. Dense gravitational signatures, multiple energy sources, nothing visible, nothing broadcasting, but the mass readings were not consistent with empty space. They were consistent with objects. Large objects, many of them. "Captain," Sotharak said. "Ambassador, my instruments are detecting significant mass concentrations, bearing 317 by 092. The readings are extensive." "Yes," I said. He waited for more. I did not offer more. "What am I reading?" he asked. "I will show you shortly," I said. "We are still in transit." He looked at me for a long moment. The tilt of his head was different this time. Not curious and amused, just intent. "How far are we from these objects?" he asked. "About 90,000 kilometers," I said. "We will be in visual range in 40 minutes." He returned to his console, and I watched him study the readings. I watched him try to make sense of the numbers. I watched the moment when he ran the calculations a second time, because the first result had seemed too large. Second ran the same calculation on a separate unit, and the two of them exchanged another low-register exchange. This time my earpiece caught fragments: mass distribution, formation pattern, power signature consistent with. He stopped speaking before the sentence finished. He had reached the same conclusion that Second had, and it was not one either of them had prepared for. I turned to Lieutenant Nolan. "Priya, bring us to the designated approach point." "Aye, Captain." "And send the confirmation signal." "Aye." She sent it. One encrypted pulse, a single tone, lasting less than a second. A code word buried in the carrier wave, a word that had been chosen 2 years ago for exactly this moment. The word was Aurora. For the next 38 minutes, the bridge was quiet. The Endurance moved through the dark on a steady heading. The ambassador sat at his console with his attendants behind him and the sensor readings scrolling in front of him, and I could see from the way he held his upper body that he was not finding the waiting comfortable. The numbers were not resolving into anything manageable. They were only getting larger. At 39 minutes, the running lights came on. Not on the Endurance. Out there, in the dark. It started with a single point of light, distant and blue-white, and for a fraction of a second, I thought one of the crew was going to say something. Nobody did. Then another point appeared, then 12 more, then dozens, then the space ahead of us, the empty, quiet, unremarkable space that had shown nothing but stars for the entire journey, began to fill with light, in ordered rows and columns, ship after ship, igniting its running array in the sequence we had spent 2 months rehearsing. It was not an explosion. It was not a chaos of fire and motion. It was geometry. Steady, patient, enormous geometry. Lines of ships stretching from left to right across the viewport. Carrier groups in formation. their profiles so large that individual hull details were visible from 90,000 kilometers. Long-range platforms that I knew from their schematics were nearly 2 kilometers in length, sitting at precise intervals like the teeth of something vast and calm. And at the center of the formation, directly on the axis of our approach, 3 dreadnoughts of the Voidbreaker class, side by side, their forward arrays pointed at no one in particular and needing no other statement. 312 ships, all of them running lights only, no weapons active, no targeting signals, no posturing, just presence, colossal and unhurried, the way a mountain is a presence. I let Sotharak look. I let the silence go on for a full minute. Then, too, the bridge crew went about their business. Lieutenant Nolan updated the navigation log. Hutchins checked a drive pressure reading. Nobody stared at the viewport. Nobody needed to. The ambassador did not speak for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I know because I was counting. When he finally turned to look at me, his compound eyes were still, and his translator was quiet for a moment before it caught up. "How long?" he said, and stopped. He tried again. "How long has this fleet been assembled?" "The bulk of it was commissioned and completed within the last 40 years, I said. "The older vessels date to about 52 years ago. The 3 center ships you are looking at were finished 8 months ago." He stared at me. "40 years, he said. "Give or take," I said. The translator gave me the next thing he said in a flat, even voice that did not match what I was watching happen in his posture. His entire upper body had changed. The comfortable authority that had carried him through the airlock and down the corridor and into the conference room, it was still there, because he was too old and too practiced to lose it completely. But it was overlaid now with something else. Something I recognized because I had felt it myself, late at night, in my early years in this posting, when the mission had still felt impossible. He said, "These are all military vessels." "Yes," I said. "All of them." "Yes." He was quiet again for a moment. Second said something to him. He responded without turning his head. Then he asked me, "What is the designation of this force?" "The 1st Terran Expeditionary," I said. The silence that followed lasted longer than the first one. He was working through the implications of that name. First, the word that means, "there are others." "There are additional formations," he said. It was not quite a question. "We have a 2nd and a 3rd, I said. "The 4th is still in formation. We did not want to overcrowd the area." I said it pleasantly, without emphasis, the way you might mention that you had not brought your entire extended family to a dinner party, because there would not have been room at the table. Corin, standing at my left, managed to keep his face completely still. I had practiced that sentence for 3 weeks, and I was glad it landed the way it did. Sotharak looked back at the fleet, then at me, then at the fleet again. "The resource requirements," he said slowly, as if working through mathematics out loud. "For this scale of construction, the materials alone." "We recycled," I said. "Several of the asteroid belts in the outer system were largely iron-nickel. We also developed automated processing platforms about 30 years ago. They work continuously. The labor cost was very low once the initial systems were established." "You built the infrastructure," he said quietly. "We built the infrastructure," I said. He understood what that meant. The ships were not the achievement. The ships were the product. The achievement was the system that could produce ships indefinitely, without pause, without ceiling, running on largely automated processes in the outer dark where nobody was watching. We had not just answered the question of whether humanity could build a fleet. We had answered the question of whether humanity could keep building one, forever, faster than the answer could be made irrelevant. He turned from the viewport, and for the first time since he had come aboard, he looked at me not as a diplomat looks at a counterpart, and not as a senior species looks at a junior one. He looked at me the way you look at someone when you realize you have been solving the wrong problem. "You knew," he said, "when I came aboard. You knew what was out here." "Yes," I said. "And you said nothing." "You had a document to show me," I said. "I thought it was polite to let you finish." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice through the translator was careful and measured. "What is it that you want from this meeting, Captain Vasquez?" "A different conversation," I said. "The same one we have been trying to start for about 6 years. We would like to have it now, if you are willing." He looked at the fleet one more time. 312 ships, silent and bright against the black, waiting with the patience of things built to outlast the arguments of the beings that built them. "Yes," he said, "I think I am willing." We turned back toward the inner system 2 hours later, and I spent most of those 2 hours sitting across from Sotherak, at the briefing table I had set up in the aft observation room. The viewport behind him framed the fleet as we moved away from it, the formation holding perfectly, ships shrinking slowly to points of light and then to nothing. I had positioned his seat so that he faced me and the fleet at the same time. Not deliberately, I would tell anyone who asked. The room was simply arranged that way. "I want to understand the timeline," he said. He had not touched the refreshment my aide Corin had placed near him, but he had also not dismissed it, which by Velhari standards meant he was not hostile. "The acceleration of your construction program. What drove it?" "Your expansion into the Karis corridor," I said. He was quiet for a moment. The Karis corridor was a region of space that humans had been using as an informal transit route for about 30 years. 18 months ago, a Velhari administrative directive had reclassified it as a protected advisory zone, which in practice meant that human ships traveling through it were subject to inspection, delay, and fees assessed by Velhari officers who were not accountable to any human authority. It had been framed as a routine administrative matter. It was not a routine administrative matter. "That was a council decision," he said. "I know," I said. "I am not assigning blame. I am answering your question. That decision was the last of several signals that told our government the diplomatic track was not moving fast enough. The construction pace increased. We were already building. We built faster." "How much faster?" "We doubled the production output," I said, "within 18 months. He absorbed this. "That is not possible," he said, and then he caught himself, because he had just seen 312 ships that had been invisible to his entire civilization's intelligence network, and the word possible had lost some of its previous authority. "We found it challenging," I said honestly. "There were engineers who worked without days off for months. There were supply chain decisions that were not comfortable, but we had a clear goal, and we were motivated." "Motivated," he said. "We did not want to have this conversation from a weaker position," I said. He looked at me steadily. "And yet you did not announce this capability. You did not use it as a deterrent. You built it in silence." "Yes. Why?" It was a genuine question. I could tell because he had dropped the careful diplomatic cadence and was asking it the way a person asks when they actually want to know the answer. "Because announcing it changes what it means," I said. "If we had broadcast our capabilities, it would have become a challenge. A provocation. You would have responded to it as a threat, and we would have spent years negotiating from behind that word. This way, you came to us. You came with a document and a set of expectations, and we were able to show you, calmly, in a controlled setting, what the actual situation is. No emergency, no incident, just clarity." He thought about this for a long time. The ships had disappeared from the viewport by now. There was only open space behind him, calm and dark. "That required extraordinary patience," he said. "Humans are patient when we need to be," I said. "We are also very impatient when we need to be. We tend to decide which one the situation calls for, and then commit completely." "Which did this situation call for?" "Both," I said. "The patience to build without showing our hand. The urgency to make sure we built fast enough." He leaned back slightly, which in Velhari body language meant he was moving from active processing to something closer to reflection. I recognized the shift and let the silence sit for a moment. "The document I brought," he said. "Yes. You did not read past the first page." "I read enough," I said. And I think we should start from a different place," I said. "Not because the document is offensive. It is not, exactly. But because it was written based on an understanding of the situation that is no longer current. It would be more productive to draft something that reflects where things actually are." "And where are things actually?" he asked. I reached into the folder in front of me and placed a single sheet of paper on the table. It was not long, a page and a half. I had written the first draft myself, 6 months ago, and it had been revised 18 times since then by a team of people who knew more about Velhari law and diplomatic convention than I did. It was, I believed, a good document. It was clear, it was reasonable, and it asked for nothing that was not already fair. Recognition of established human sovereign space, I said. Define transit rights without inspection authority by third parties. Removal of the Keras corridor classification. And a mutual framework for handling disputes between our civilizations. One where both parties have equal standing, and neither has automatic authority over the other. He read it. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at me. This is what you wanted 6 years ago, he said. Yes, I said. Before the fleet. Yes. But you could not get it. No, I said. You were not ready to have that conversation. And now? Now you have seen the fleet, I said simply. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the viewport, the system's outer planets drifted in their slow, indifferent orbits, and somewhere far beyond them, 312 ships held their formation in the dark, with no urgency, and no impatience, and all the time in the world. There is a clause here, he said, tapping the document, regarding mutual defense. Yes. You are offering to include Velhari-adjacent territories in the scope of human defensive guarantees. Under the framework, yes. If a threat emerges that affects both our peoples, the response would be coordinated. Neither of us acts unilaterally in the other's space. He looked up. You are offering us protection. I am offering us an alliance, I said. There is a difference. Protection implies one party is stronger. An alliance implies both parties benefit. He was very still for a moment. Then, you think there are threats significant enough to require both our civilizations to respond? I think the galaxy is large, I said, and we have both been paying attention mostly to each other. I would rather we were not surprised by what else is out there. It was the most direct thing I had said all day. It landed somewhere different from the rest of the conversation. I could see it in the way he looked at me, not calculating anymore, not diplomatic, something quieter. You have been watching the outer range signals, he said. We have been watching the outer range signals, I said. Another long silence. Corin refilled my water glass and faded back to his position near the door. He was very good at being invisible when I needed him to be. Sotharak reached out and turned the document toward himself. He read it a third time, more slowly. I did not speak. I had said everything that needed saying, and now it was his turn to think, which was the most important part of a negotiation, and the part that most people made the mistake of trying to rush. I will need to transmit this to the council, he said finally. Of course, I said. We can provide a secure channel. And you understand that my authority in this meeting is limited. I cannot commit the council to... Ambassador, I said gently. You are the senior diplomatic emissary of the Velhari Interstellar Council. Your authority is as complete as it is ever going to be. We both know that. He looked at me. A long, careful look. Then something shifted in his expression. Not defeat, nothing like that. More like the moment when a very complex problem resolves into something simpler than expected, and the relief and the surprise arrive together. You have been doing this a long time, he said. 6 years in this posting, I said. Before that, 12 years in interstellar relations. Before that, I was a navigation officer, and I had a lot of long watches to think about how I wanted the galaxy to work. And is this how you wanted it to work? Approximately, I said. He made a sound that his translator rendered as a short exhalation. I thought it might be the closest thing his species had to a quiet laugh. You are not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? Someone more eager, he said. More nervous. Your species is young by our standards. Young civilizations are usually eager to prove something. We did prove something, I said. 312 ships worth. We just did it quietly. He looked at the document again. Then he picked up his stylus, a long, narrow instrument suited to his hand structure, and for a moment, I thought he was going to sign it then and there. He did not. He set the stylus down and stood. I would like to rest, he said, and then I would like to continue this conversation. Of course, I said. Take as long as you need. He moved toward the door. At the threshold he stopped, and without turning around, he said something in Velhari that my earpiece gave me 2 seconds later. One who waits well, wins well. It was a Velhari proverb. I knew it. It was something they said about patience and strategy, and the long game of political survival. I had read it in a briefing document 3 years ago, and I had written it on a piece of paper and put it on the wall above my desk, because it was also something humans believed, and it had seemed important at the time to have it where I could see it. I did not tell him that. Some things are better kept. I sat in the quiet room for a while after he left, looking at the document on the table and the empty space beyond the viewport, and I thought about the 6 years, and the sleepless quarters, and the days when the mission had felt like carrying a very large weight uphill, with no certainty that the top of the hill existed. I thought about the engineers who had worked without rest, about the researchers on the cold fourth planet who had been out there for 7 years finding the geology interesting, about the crews of 312 ships who had been sitting in the dark for weeks, maintaining silence, running drills, trusting that the plan was working. It was working. Not finished, not resolved, but working. The direction had changed. The conversation was different now. That was enough for one day. He asked me on the shuttle bay ramp. We had spent the previous morning in final session, 3 hours at the conference table with Corin and 2 of Sotharak's senior staff present, working through the specific language of the Transit Corridor Clause and the exact parameters of the Mutual Observation Framework. It was careful, technical work, the kind that does not feel significant while you are doing it, but carries enormous weight in the years afterward when someone reaches for a document to resolve a dispute. I had a good team, so did he. By the time we finished, the document was 6 pages, and it was right. He had not signed it at the table. He had said he would transmit it to the council with his full endorsement, which in Velhari diplomatic custom was functionally equivalent to a signature from his side. The formal ratification would take 30 days, maybe 40. That was normal. That was fine. We had walked together to the shuttle bay in a silence that was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who have said the things that matter and are now moving through the practical business of ending a meeting. His attendants were already aboard the shuttle. His personal case was loaded. Everything was in order. He paused at the top of the ramp. Not dramatically, just paused, the way people do when something occurs to them that they want to say, and they are deciding whether to say it. He turned to face me. "May I ask you something?" he said. "That is not part of the negotiation." "Of course," I said. "Were you afraid?" he asked. "During these years, while you were building, waiting, when you did not know if it would be enough or if it would come together in time." I thought about the question carefully before I answered it, because it deserved careful thought, and because he had asked it in a way that was not tactical. There was no advantage to be taken from my answer. He genuinely wanted to know. "Yes," I said. "Every day, for a long time. We did not know if the timeline would hold. We did not know if the construction would finish before the political situation became unrecoverable. There were months where the signals from your council were very bad, and our people were looking at each other, wondering if we had miscalculated the window." He was quiet for a moment. "And yet you did not accelerate the contact. You waited until you were ready." "If we had come to you too early," I said, "we would have had a different conversation, one we would have lost." "Yes," he said. He looked at me for a long moment. "You made a very difficult choice." "We made a necessary one," I said. "There is a difference." He turned slightly, looking past me at the wall of the shuttle bay, or perhaps at nothing in particular, the middle distance that people stare into when they are thinking about something that does not have a shape yet. "My species has been in space for 900 years, he said. "In that time we have encountered 41 other civilizations. 12 of them are now part of our council structure. 17 reached agreements of various kinds. 8, he paused. 8 did not survive the early contact period. I already knew this. It was in the historical records we had spent years studying, but I let him say it. I came here," he continued, "expecting a 40-second case of one of those standard outcomes, a young species, some resources of interest, a straightforward negotiation about terms and integration and timelines. And instead you found the fleet," I said. "And instead, I found the fleet," he said, "and something else I did not expect." "What was that?" He was quiet for a moment. "Humans, who were not trying to frighten me, who were not trying to humiliate me or reverse the power entirely, or make me feel what it is like to be on the other side of a large advantage." He looked at me directly. "You had every reason to walk into that negotiation differently, more forcefully, You chose not to. Yes, I said. Why? Because we do not want an enemy, I said. We never did. We want a neighbor. A difficult, complicated, occasionally frustrating neighbor, with 900 years of habits we do not fully understand, and a political structure that gives us headaches, but a neighbor. He made that small sound again, the one his translator had rendered as an exhalation before. I was starting to think it was actually something warmer, something closer to an acknowledgement. The signals from the outer range, he said quietly. We have been receiving anomalous readings for about 6 months, things that do not fit our existing models. We have been receiving them for 8 months, I said. He looked at me. We both understood what we were talking about. The galaxy was large and it was not empty, and there were things in the outer dark that neither of our civilizations had charted. That was a problem that made everything else smaller and more manageable by comparison. The mutual defense clause, he said. Yes, I said. You wrote it with this in mind. We wrote it with everything in mind, I said, including this. He stood on the ramp for another moment. His attendant appeared briefly at the shuttle hatch above, caught sight of us, and discreetly disappeared again. The shuttle bay was quiet. The mechanical sounds of the ship moved around us at a low, steady frequency. Drives, ventilation, the small, constant work of keeping a vessel alive in space. I will tell you something, he said. When I first read the sensor readings coming off your outer system, when the numbers would not resolve into anything that made sense, before I understood what I was looking at, I was afraid. He said it simply and without apology, which told me it had cost him something to say it. His species did not discuss fear openly. It was not a shameful thing for them, exactly, but it was private. A personal matter, not something you handed to a counterpart across a diplomatic table. Good, I said. That is an appropriate response to 312 warships. The corner of his expression shifted in a way I had not seen before, from any Velhari. It was small, a tightening around one of his ocular clusters, a very slight change in the set of his lower jaw, but I recognized it the way you recognize something you have been watching for, without quite knowing you were watching for it. He was amused, genuinely, warmly amused. Appropriate, he repeated. Yes. He turned to go, then stopped one final time, half-turned, looked at me over one shoulder with those still, dark, compound eyes. He said something in Velhari, and my earpiece was a fraction slow catching it, so I heard the sounds first, and the translation a beat after. The sounds were low and quiet, 4 syllables, the kind of thing said in a register that suggested it was meant to be heard, but not broadcast. The translation came through a moment later. So were we. I stood in the shuttle bay and watched the ramp retract, and the hatch seal, and the docking clamps release, and the shuttle drop away from the Endurance into clean open space. I watched it for a long time, until it was too small to see without instruments. So were we. 900 years in space, 41 civilizations encountered, an empire spanning 40 systems, and they had been afraid too. Not of us specifically, not until this week, but of whatever was out in the outer dark, sending signals that did not fit existing models. Of the universe, which is very large and does not promise safety to anyone, no matter how long they have been navigating it. I turned and walked back into the ship. Corin was waiting in the corridor. He had a tablet in his hand and a look on his face that meant good news of a practical variety. Council transmission came in while you were in the bay, he said. They are convening a ratification session in 22 days. 22, I said. That is faster than the estimate. Apparently the ambassador sent a personal note ahead of the formal transmission. Corin paused. We do not have the full content, but our contact at the relay station said the note was flagged as urgent, and the council responded within 4 hours. 4 hours? I said. Yes. I kept walking. The corridors of the Endurance moved around me, familiar and steady. The sound of the drives, the voices of my crew at work, the particular quality of recycled air that every ship has, and that every person who has spent years aboard ships knows, and does not consciously notice until they are reminded of it. I thought about 22 days. I thought about the documents sitting in the Velhari council chambers, 6 pages of careful language that had been revised 18 times, and now carried the personal endorsement of the most senior diplomat in the Velhari system. I thought about the outer range signals, 8 months of readings that no one had yet found a model for, and the mutual defense clause that addressed a threat we had not named, because naming it would have been premature, and possibly incorrect, and definitely alarming. I thought about the fleet, still holding formation past the heliopause, 312 ships in the dark, their crews going through their routines with the comfortable patience of people who have been trained to wait, and are good at it. I stopped at a viewport in the main corridor. The inner system spread out ahead of us as the Endurance came back around the middle orbital path, planets in their slow rounds, the distant warmth of the sun pulling everything gently toward itself the way it had for 4.5 billion years. A quiet system, the ambassador had said. We find it peaceful, I had said. We did. We genuinely did, and we had worked, quietly and steadily and without announcement, to keep it that way. I thought about what I had told him. We did not want an enemy. We wanted a neighbor. It was the truest thing I had said in 2 days of very careful words. We had built the fleet because the neighborhood had required it. We had kept the fleet quiet, because frightening people is not the same as being safe. We had come to the table without the document he had brought, because his document was a relic of a misunderstanding, and misunderstandings are better cleared than accommodated. And now there was a different document, one that put both our civilizations on equal footing, in the only way that actually works, not through symmetry of power, which fluctuates, but through a framework both sides have a reason to protect. Was it over? Not remotely. 22 days to ratification, and then years of implementation, and the outer range signals still there every morning when the night watch team logged off and handed the sensor reports to the day shift. But it was different now. The conversation was different. The relationship was different. Corin appeared at my shoulder. The bridge is requesting your sign-off on the return trajectory. Tell Priya I will be there in 2 minutes, I said. He moved off. I stayed at the viewport for a moment longer. So were we, the ambassador had said. Afraid. 900 years in, and still afraid of the dark at the edge of the map. That had surprised me more than anything else in 2 days of surprises. Not because it was strange, but because it was human. Not in the species sense, in the deeper sense. The universal sense. The sense that applies to every thinking being that has ever looked up at a sky full of lights and understood that the lights are not friendly or unfriendly. They are simply there, and the universe makes no promises to anyone. We had built 312 ships because we understood that. We had done it quietly because we understood something else. That announcing your strength before it is decisive is a way of inviting a test you are not ready to pass. We had been ready. Today had been the proof. I pushed off from the viewport and walked to the bridge. Through the forward glass, the inner system spread ahead of us, warm and familiar, and ours. Behind us, past where the eye could reach, the fleet was standing down from formation, ships breaking into their patrol and training rotations, crews returning to the ordinary rhythms of days at sea. They had done their part. They had shown what needed showing, and they had done it without a single weapon system activated, without a single hostile move, without a single moment of unnecessary menace. That was the harder thing to build, not the ships, the judgment, the understanding that strength is most useful when it does not need to be used, the patience to wait until the moment is right, and then to use it not as a hammer, but as a hand extended across a table. Lieutenant Nolan looked up as I came onto the bridge. Welcome back, Captain. Ready to plot the return course. Take us home, Priya, I said. She turned to her console and began the sequence. Around us, the crew settled into the comfortable motion of a ship turning for home after a long mission, and the Endurance began its patient arc back through the system it had left that morning. We had not won anything today. Victory was not the word that fit. We had moved the story forward. We had opened a door that had been closed for 6 years and stepped through it without breaking it off its hinges. We had shown what we were and done it on our terms, and the being who had come to tell us what we were allowed to keep had left with a different understanding of the question. That was what 6 years of work felt like. Arriving. I stood at the forward viewport and let the feeling settle into me. Not triumph, not celebration, but something quieter and more durable. Relief, partly. Satisfaction, partly. And underneath both of those, still present, the thing that had never entirely left in 6 years of this posting. Watchfulness, the outer range signals, waiting on the sensor logs, The galaxy, large and full of things we had not yet encountered. The new framework, real but fragile, needing years of careful tending before it could be trusted to hold weight. We were not done. We were never going to be done. That was the nature of the work. But we were further along than we had been yesterday. And yesterday we had been further along than the day before. And so it went, and so it would go, one careful day at a time. "Captain," Corin said from behind me, "engineering wants to know if you want the fleet recall order logged as a training exercise or a diplomatic demonstration." I thought about it for a moment. "Log it as both," I said, because it was both. He made a note. The Endurance moved through the soft dark of its home system, steady and certain, carrying its crew and its captain and a 6-page document that might, in 22 days, become the thing that changed the shape of the future. I watched the stars a little longer. Then I got back to work.